A story begins. On a stormy night, a young boy named Kuno sat surrounded by his family and everything felt calm. Yet something heavy lingered in the air as he quietly asked them what it truly meant to see, because he himself was blind and could only imagine the world through words and sounds. And his father answered gently, explaining that seeing meant being able to recognize colors and shapes to tell one form from another. And he added that Kuno's eyes carried the scar of the sacred night hero, a mark tied to honor and sacrifice, something he should hold his head high for. But even as those reassuring words were spoken, Kuno could hear the servants nearby whispering softly, their voices filled with pity rather than respect. And that unspoken sadness settled deep in his chest. Yet life moved on. And sometime later, one of the maids guided him through the halls to his magic lesson. And as he walked, he wondered why he was even studying magic when he couldn't move freely without help. But the maid encouraged him, telling him he should be proud to bear the emblem of water. And when she brought him to the lesson room, his new tutor introduced herself as Gia, calmly telling him that from that day on, she would be the one teaching him. And after a while, they began practicing. And when Kuno used Aori magic for the first time, he managed to form a small bubble of water, delicate and trembling in the air. And he asked Jenny what kind of magic that was. And she explained without thinking that Aori was a water spell about the size of an eyeball. And Kuno froze in surprise while Jenny immediately realized her mistake and apologized for saying it so carelessly. Yet instead of being hurt, Kuno felt excitement rising inside him, because if he couldn't see the world with his eyes, then maybe he could create his own vision through magic. And that thought stunned Jenny. And later, while Kuno was eating, he spoke with curiosity about how fascinated he now was by what he was consuming, wanting to know what was inside his sandwich, asking his maid about every single ingredient as she patiently guided him. And he admitted that food now made him curious, though the many smells felt overwhelming. And the maid laughed happily, saying all the effort had been worth it, then playfully rubbed a grape against his face and asked if he could guess what it was. But Kuno calmly warned her that if she kept teasing him like that, her salary might suffer, turning the moment lighthearted. And later she brought him to Professor Flora, the woman responsible for reading books to him. And Kuno politely asked her to tell him the story of the sacred night Estor, which caught Flora off guard at first. But the maid nodded approvingly, so Flora agreed, only asking him to speak up if it became painful to listen. And Kuno assured her there was no need to worry, because now more than ever, he truly wanted to learn. And as his training continued, the story revealed that long ago, there had been a massive war between heroes from across the world and the Demon King. And the hero of that land, Estor Hudlia, managed to defeat the Demon King. Though in that brutal battle, he lost an arm and a leg. And years after the war, Estor's descendants were born missing something. Sometimes an arm, sometimes a leg, or sometimes the light in their eyes. And according to legend, these children were the hero's reincarnations, carrying the hero's scar. But Kuno didn't believe that at all, because to him, he was simply himself, and the mana he used was his own. And with that mana, he was determined to create his own eyes, even though it was obvious the effort would drain him completely. And later, as he rested, he complained that it still wasn't enough, and his maid jokingly asked if she wasn't giving him enough affection. But he replied that affection wasn't what he lacked. What he needed was more knowledge and stamina, the foundation required for truly powerful magic. And the maid reminded him that he was still very young, only 7 years old, and that he barely ate much, but sooner or later, he would grow stronger. Though Kuno felt that by then it might be too late, because if he fainted from using such a basic spell, how could he ever achieve anything? And she gently advised him to take things step by step. And since he wanted to improve his body and endurance, but struggled due to his disability, she suggested practicing sword swinging, an idea Kuno immediately loved. And Echo excitedly rushed off to find a sword master, only for Kuno to stop her and sincerely thank her for everything she had done. And Echo, seizing the perfect moment, boldly asked for a raise, to which Kuno replied that she had been making far too much noise while he was training, completely turning the situation around. And sometime later, Jenny arrived at the estate and noticed Kuno practicing fencing, and Echo announced Jenny's arrival, prompting the new instructor, Oro, to bid Kuno farewell. And when Jenny approached him, she could tell he had changed significantly, asking if he wanted to rest. But Kuno refused, so they immediately began reviewing the Iori spell from last time. And without hesitation, Kuno left her completely stunned, as she wondered how he had improved so much when she had only taught him the basics. And meanwhile, elsewhere, a maid informed Princess America that the carriage was ready, though the princess clearly lacked enthusiasm about visiting her fiancé, because Kuno always seemed so gloomy. Yet, the maid reminded her that it was the king himself who had made that decision. So whether she likes it or not, she has no choice but to go. With no room to refuse that engagement, Mira steps into the carriage, and as it moves forward, she thinks about how Kuno is considered valuable to the kingdom because he bears the hero's scar, accepting this political marriage as nothing more than a duty tied to royal blood. Yet every time she has met Kuno before, he has always seemed completely withdrawn. never wanting to do anything, constantly belittling himself because of his disability, and she knows she cannot bear to look at that lifeless expression for the rest of her life. But when she arrives at Kunon's home, everything feels different because he greets her cheerful and smiling, and she hesitantly asks if something happened, only for him to say honestly that he has fallen in love with magic, apologizing for worrying her before, and inviting her to stay with him that day, saying he wants her to hear his stories because he has so many fun things he wants to share. And America is caught off guard because she never knew Kunon could look like this, and without realizing it, she spends the entire day by his side, and by sunset, as the carriage carries her back, she feels quietly fascinated, while Kunon, left behind, feels for the first time that he has truly reached out his hand towards someone. And Echo tells him that this is because he is already acting like a real knight. And sometime later, Kunon asks Flora to teach him how to be a proper knight so he can treat Princess Marisa the way she deserves. Though Echo quickly interrupts, insisting that a true knight should also have a sense of humor. And elsewhere, Jenny finds herself wondering what in the world she is supposed to be now, because Kunon can already create 7 flawless spheres at the same time, something she herself could never manage. And she feels that her student learns far too quickly and that she has nothing left to teach him in basic magic. So, she decides it is time to move on to intermediate magic, even though she hesitates because magic, while useful, is far from safe. And the original agreement was only to teach a child basic spells. Yet, things have become far more complicated than expected, since Kunon is still only 7 years old and far too young for advanced techniques. But even so, she refuses to give up, though her excitement earns her a sharp warning to be quiet while she is in the library. And the next day, when she meets Kunon again, she tells him they will be doing something different, and he immediately takes the chance to show off his newly learned knightly manners, making Jenny think he has changed yet again. But she continues and explains the new lesson, saying that the Iori spell simply creates water, but now it is time to break down its properties and learn how to alter them, changing temperature, thickness, composition, color, and more. And she demonstrates with 2 spheres of water, one cold and one warm, explaining that by stacking different modifications, true originality in magic is born, the decisive difference in talent between one mage and another. And Kunon finds this fascinating, so he puts it to the test and asks Echo to drink from a small cup of the modified water, and she reacts in shock, saying it tastes like apple, while Kunon calmly corrects her, saying it actually tastes like plum. And Jenny, utterly frustrated, silently begs him not to master the modifications she spent an entire night developing so quickly, admitting that it feels like he can do everything. Though Kunon honestly replies that it is actually quite difficult, but he intends to give it his all. And later that night, holding 2 fruits in his hands, he reflects that although he knows their tastes and smells, he still does not know their colors. And if he does not know colors, he will not be able to create proper variations in his magic, which will make creating his eyes even harder. Yet, he refuses to give up. And the next day, when Echo asks what he wants to drink, he oddly requests tea with milk, but without milk, which makes no sense at all. Then asks instead for hot water. And as he uses his magic and the water flows over the fruit, he suddenly jolts upright in shock, saying it feels like he was able to see. And Echo, overwhelmed, demands to know if he is telling the truth and threatens to slap him if he is lying. But Kunon asks her to calm down because he cannot confirm anything with that attitude, and she scolds him, saying that while she asked for a knight with a sense of humor, she never asked for tasteless jokes. And he quickly stops her, explaining that he did perceive colors, or rather sense them through his magic, giving her an example and asking whether a green apple is red. And she answers no, then explains that it is normal for him to be confused since he does not yet associate colors with names because he has never seen them before, adding that green apples tend to have a slightly paler shade. And Kunon asks why everything is so confusing with so many subtle differences, only for her to reply that this is simply how the world is. And then she asks, how many apples are there? And when he answers correctly, she is left in awe. And later, Echo reports everything to his father, explaining that although Kunon's range is still very limited, he can distinguish colors, and the closer he is to an object, the clearer it becomes, especially when he touches it. And his father asks if that means he can read, and Echo explains that he uses his fingers to identify the color of the ink. And even though he does not know the letters yet, he is completely captivated by illustrated drawings. And his father wonders if they should bring Kunon back to the main mansion since they currently live apart, because Kunon himself did not want to trouble others and also because his wife never left his side. But Echo says that Kunon is trying to change drastically and works hard every single day, and moving him to a completely different environment might only hinder his goals, and his father agrees, adding that if he wants to see his son, he is close enough anyway, though Echo would have to take care of him alone. To which she replies that it is no problem at all since she does everything for money, making him laugh as he says that her blunt honesty actually seems good for his son, and she immediately tells him that instead of praising her, he should raise her salary, though he only laughs harder. And sometime later, she meets Kunon again as he prepares to conduct an experiment to show his teacher Jenny, who is about to arrive, and Echo urges him to do something impressive. And as he uses Iori magic, He creates a massive red sphere, and at that exact moment, his family approaches. And when he hears his mother's voice, his focus slips and the bubble explodes, splashing red all over him, causing his mother to panic instantly, while his father demands to know how something so horrible could happen. And Kuno does not understand what is wrong until Echo explains that red is the color of human blood, and his father, furious, declares that Kuno will be punished for 2 months and that Echo's salary will be cut for 3 months, nearly making her collapse on the spot. While elsewhere, Jenny, hiding and watching, thinks to herself that this boy is terrifying, wondering just how far he will go, because at this pace, he may one day obtain the most prestigious title in the world, the title of the Blue Sorcerer. And later, Echo meets Kuno to deliver his new study materials, and we see that he is now 9 years old, having grown into a delicate, slightly feminine-looking boy. But the time has come for him to begin school. Kuno's father informs his older brother that he has a small task for him, explaining that he wants to send Kuno to a school for nobles. But as he already knows well, Kuno has barely ever left the mansion. And the older brother remembers how, when they were younger, Kuno once asked him to go out together, even though he was nervous because he couldn't see anything. And his brother promised to hold his hand. Yet the moment they went down a single step, he messed up, let go, and Kuno fell flat on his face. And remembering that failure, he now resolves to be a better brother and tells his father that he will give it his best effort this time. While elsewhere, Kuno is learning a bit about hydromancy, a practice where water is poured into a container infused with supernatural power to search for objects or predict the future. And Echo, surprised, jokingly asks if he can find her lost youth or the sparkle she thinks she's lost, earning herself the title of shameless. But Kuno responds sincerely that she is still young and very beautiful, and if he weren't the Marquise's son, he would ask her to be his fiancé, which makes Echo scold him for being such a flirt and telling him he shouldn't say things like that to a woman 10 years older than him. And the two burst into laughter while Flora watches them, thinking these people are truly strange creatures. And later, Flora continues her tutoring, reflecting that she has taught Lord Kuno plenty about etiquette, but may have also taught him a bit too much about being charming, because now every word he speaks sounds like a compliment. And while he drinks his tea, he casually says he would like to make a toast to Flora's beautiful eyes, which worries her slightly, though compared to how he used to be, he is undeniably adorable. And that night, the group prepares to meet Kuno's father, and as they walk through the cold forest, Echo asks if he can really do that, and Kuno uses Aori to create 2 large bubbles of warm water modified with a membrane that is incredibly soft and elastic. Then he wonders aloud why his father might be calling him, worrying that he might have done something wrong. But Echo tells him she highly doubts he did anything to deserve a scolding, since she already learned her lesson after creating that sea of blood, to which Kuno replies that it was her fault anyway because she asked him to make it extra large. And later, upon arriving at the mansion, they are welcomed by Balan and by Io, Kuno's older brother, and everyone goes together to meet their father. And as they walk, Io asks Kuno if he wants him to hold his hand, but Kuno answers that it's not necessary since he can perceive his surroundings quite well now. And Io watches him and remembers how he used to always look depressed, telling him he's glad to see him doing well. And then both sons meet their parents, who tell Kuno that Flora has already explained everything taught at the noble school. Yet his father still asks if he has any interest in attending a real school. But Kuno replies that he isn't interested because he doesn't want to trouble others. And right now, there is something he prioritizes above school. And his father responds that he has always believed Kuno should follow what he truly wants, prompting Kuno to ask if there would be any problem if he didn't attend school. And his father explains that children of the nobility are legally obligated to attend, and that Kuno is technically enrolled in a noble school. But due to his special circumstances, the king granted him special permission, allowing him not to attend. And Kuno replies that this sounds like nepotism, a kind of favoritism, which makes his father tell him not to call it that. His father tells him not to take it that way, adding that they didn't call him there just to argue about words, because what he really wants is for Kuno to seriously consider attending school. And Kuno asks if this is about how he uses his allowance, which quickly turns into a small back and forth about wasted expenses and responsible spending and other trivial things, until Kuno smoothly changes the topic and asks whether his father still hasn't forgiven him for filling the garden with blood, to which his father flatly replies that he hasn't forgiven him at all, and warns that if he ever does it again, he'll be grounded without allowance for months, though his mother gently pulls them back to the main issue. And his father then asks Kuno to think about Princess Mira, explaining that if Kuno fails to fulfill his duties, he could fall behind in society and put the princess in an awkward position because of him. And hearing it framed that way, Kuno decides he will attend, even if he honestly finds it annoying. And his father clarifies that he isn't asking him to go for many years only to take the promotion exams, because If he passes them, he will receive a graduation diploma. And since there are 5 exams, he would only need to go 5 times. And Echo reveals that Princess Mira and he himself will graduate after the next exam. So Kunon will take them alongside them, which makes his mother excited as she announces it's time to get his clothes ready, and calls Echo so they can all go together. And as they do, his father quietly tells Io that besides the princess, there are other members of royalty who may try to approach Kunon, but Io assures him not to worry because he will stay by Kunon's side. And sometime later, Kunon meets with the princess and tells her that he will be taking the promotion exams, which excites her because it means they can spend time together at school. And knowing he has never been there before, she promises to guide him and keep him company. And Kunon thanks her, but also worries that if he stays close to her, all the boys who like her will get jealous. To which Mira nervously replies that she highly doubts that will be a problem. And when Kunon asks if she isn't popular, she teasingly tells him not to insult her, saying she is obviously popular and has as many boys in love with her as fingers on her right hand, meaning 5. And as months pass, Kunon prepares to leave dressed like a medieval version of a legendary sorcerer, prompting Echo to comment that he looks absolutely adorable, while Kunon jokes that his secret identity has been exposed, and Io wonders if Kunon was always this frivolous. And later, before departing, Kunon uses his magic to coat the carriage wheels, and once they set off, Io remarks that you can't feel a thing, and that the magic is incredibly useful, then asks Kunon if he feels okay being so far from home, and Kunon reassures him, saying he knows he worried him a lot in the past and still feels guilty about the time he tripped and got hurt. But now he's fine, explaining that maybe before he wanted to disappear from the world, but now he wants to live in it no matter what, which makes Io happy to see how much his little brother has changed since learning magic. Though the touching moment is immediately ruined when Kunon casually declares that he's motivated to live even if the rest of the world dies, saying he plans to live so long he'll feel sorry for the rest of humanity, leaving Io wondering what on earth happened to his brother and suspecting it's all Echo's fault. And finally, they arrive at the school where Mira welcomes them, complimenting Kunon on his beautiful bow tie, which he confirms while wondering if it's possible for it to be cuter than her, prompting her to say that's impossible, and making him glad because otherwise he'd have had to take it off, while Echo watches them, baffled by the kind of conversations those two have. And as they prepare to enter, Kunon suddenly stops, making them ask if he's okay, while he listens to the overwhelming number of voices around him, thinking that his past self would have cowered, but now he's different. So he asks Mira to take his hand. And elsewhere, a novice teacher waits for them, having read in the report that Lord Kunon is supposedly very shy and worrying whether she'll be able to guide him properly, only to be proven immediately wrong when students begin to marvel at him, as does the teacher herself, who calls his name and introduces herself as Katz, the teacher assigned to guide him that day. And Kunon introduces himself, but politely warns her that at this moment he is a young lady, bowing and explaining that biologically he is a man and has a man's personality, but right now, he is a beautiful young lady, leaving Katz completely confused about what he's talking about until the bell rings and the others leave, making Katz think this won't be simple at all. And from above, some boys watch him and whisper that he's the famous boy with the hero's scar who received great blessings, though when they notice the prince's irritation, they quickly dismiss it as cheap, and the prince grows angry seeing how well his sister gets along with Kunon. So he turns away and orders his attendants to follow him. And later, Katz asks Kunon if he knows how the promotion exams work, which he confirms, prompting her to explain that normally there's preparation time between exams, but an exception will be made for him, which annoys Kunon as he accuses his father and the king of being close friends and pushing the school through nepotism. But Katz pretends she heard nothing, hands him the exam, and tells him to begin, only for Kunon to keep insisting they're in cahoots, calling his father and the king accomplices until Katz reminds him she allowed him to speak freely, but asks him not to drag her into political trouble. And later, while grading his papers, she admits she never expected him to talk through the entire exam and still answer everything correctly. And elsewhere in the cafeteria, Mira and Kunon run into Prince Lily, drawing a crowd just as Io notices and worries about the situation. And the prince wonders if that brat truly received his father's blessings, while Mira asks him not to go too far, only for him to order her not to interfere. And Kunon thinks things were going perfectly, but if the prince targets the princess, he'll have to act, though fortunately, Io steps in. Yet Lily snaps that he didn't give them permission to speak with his followers, backing him up, while Io can't believe a royal is already confronting Kunon on the very first day. And then Kunon quietly uses Aori to gather tiny water particles and soak Lily's pants before innocently asking if he wet himself, causing the prince to panic and insist he didn't, then flee in embarrassment while Io and Mira know exactly who did it. And Kunon casually asks who's hungry, ignoring Io's question about whether it was him, saying instead that he wants a hamburger. And while eating, he asks who that annoying guy was, learning from Mira that he's her brother, the 7th prince, which makes Kunon comment that no brother should fail to treasure his younger siblings. And though the incident passes, Io can only pray they graduate without further trouble, while elsewhere, Lily seethes with anger, already determined to take revenge somehow. So friend, if you enjoy this anime and want next epic episodes, so don't forget to like and subscribe the channel.